Okay, so it is the top of the hour and we've got a few of you here. We're supposed to have several more folks coming in, but let's go ahead and do a little bit of a soft start. So my name is Susan Mannlein and I am so happy to be here with all of you. We've got some more folks coming in here. Top of the hour and we've got a few of you here. We're supposed to have several more folks coming in, but let's go ahead.
Can I just check if any of you have got your swap card app open? If so, could you mute it? It just gives backfeed.
I believe it. Yeah, there we go. It is done. Thank you.
Perfect.
Great, thanks. Yeah,
Thank you.
Hear myself re-saying what I just said. So welcome, Russell. Welcome to you. Nice to meet you after connecting yesterday. Maria, welcome. So again, I'm Susan Mannlein, and I'll be one of your facilitators or one of your session leaders here today. And I have the pleasure of working with Richard Friend, whom I've had the pleasure of working with for about 10 or 12 years now. And Richard and I actually knew of each other for years before that. So I had heard of the legacy and of Richard Friend for years. We actually have lived in several of the same places, but never had crossed paths. And my experience with Richard is even better than I had been led to believe it would be. And so we've worked with a number of clients on topics like diversity, equity, inclusion, leadership development, emotional intelligence, all kinds of great stuff. And I have referred to Richard for years as my work husband. And sometimes I like him a lot better than the one I'm with. I think he knows that. And I've learned so much from Richard and sessions like this over the years. Richard, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Oh, well, thank you, Susan. Yes, we've been together working for a dozen years. And while we had both heard of each other before we met, it was sort of like love at first sight. It was one of those immediate connections. I'm sure each of you have had your opportunity to cross paths with folks like that as well. My background, I've been doing leadership development work for 35 plus years, but I really came into this doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the pandemic has sort of opened the aperture, I feel, for me, and I'm sure for many of you as well, around the possibilities of virtual connection. So I'm grateful for the fact that each of you, wherever you are, is joining us today. I'm more high touch than I am high tech, but I appreciate the opportunity to connect anyways.
Thanks, Richard. So folks, we're talking about blind spots, about broadening our network, and this applies to leadership development, this applies to working with teams, and this applies to creating sustained success in organizations, and that's going to be our focus here today. And as you may already know, in our eyes, our literal eyes, our literal blind spot is the place where the retina doesn't have any rods or cones. It's where the optic nerve enters the eyeball. And so we literally have this area in our field of vision where it's grayed out, where we actually have a blind spot. What our amazing brain does is it fills in that area with things in and around that blind spot. And so what we have as we look around in our field of vision is, of course, a full picture in our peripheral vision, but it's not actual reality. So what people have used over the years, of course, is this metaphor for talking about the blind spots that we have in decision-making in our roles as leaders. So similarly, we don't operate in the world to make decisions with blind spots. What we do instead with that partial or fragmented information is fill it in. And so, or at least we think we fill it in, right? We consciously or unconsciously get information from others, from data, from intel, from all kinds of sources. And sometimes, over time, or sometimes in an instant, we use it to make decisions. So let me go ahead and pull up our slides here and share something with you. Can everybody see the slides? Okay, James, thanks for that feedback. Okay. So what or whom do you see on the screen?
Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in chat.
James says Adele. Anybody see anyone else? And Gulam and Maria say also Adele in chat. Now, who is Adele, for those who may not know?
But aren't her eyes upside down? Her eyes, the face is upside down, but aren't the eyes the right way around?
Okay, so we'll come to that. She may look a little strange to Russell, maybe to others. So it's Adele. Everyone knows who Adele is, right? Let's go ahead and click. When we turn the face right side up, we all see what Russell and maybe others of you saw as well. That her face, actually some of her features were upside down, right? So let me go ahead and back up here for a second. To most of us, she actually looked pretty normal, right? And we recognized her with those features. But when we flip that picture around, we can see that her face was in fact modified, right? The whole time. So why wasn't that obvious to us straight away? Or at least all of us straight away?
Because our brain makes sense. Sorry.
Our brain's a pattern hunter. So it looks for patterns and fills in the blanks.
Yep. Our brain absolutely looks for patterns, fills it in with things it knows, things that are familiar to it, right? And makes sense of things. So it knows the way that a face looks, right? The fusiform part of the brain connects with that and knows what it's supposed to look like. And so lots of times we don't see reality, but we see what we think reality should be or should look like. So thanks for taking a minute to do that. So let me go ahead and take those slides down. We'd love to see your faces as much as possible. So this gives us a good lead in to the next question. So in chat or on mic, what's the danger if we don't take the time or make the time to build authentic relationships, to build a broad base of relationships to inform our decision making?
We jump to conclusions.
Say more about that, James. What do you mean by we jump to conclusions?
Well, in the way I think that was being said, our brain looks for familiarity. It often also looks for confirmation that we're right in many cases. So when we go into a situation, be it coaching individually, group coaching, lecturing, speaking, training, whatever, if we go in with an unconscious or conscious bias, unconscious being more dangerous, our brain looks for evidence that we're right. And if it's not conscious and we've not paid full attention to something that is being spoken or something which is being given to us non-verbally, then it will not enter us as something to be considered. And therefore, when we're in danger of justifying our own feelings, be good, bad, right, wrong, or indifferent, it doesn't necessarily matter. It just informs us that we think something is right, where actually we may be completely off because we've not taken that rounded view of information that's coming to us, like only taking one stream of data, not 4 streams of data out of which we make our decision.
Absolutely. There actually are studies that look at confirmation bias, which is an area of the human brain that James is talking about, showing when white papers have been written, which have different perspectives in them and given to people or given to groups of people who we know have one perspective or the other, that what it shows is that this group talks about how the white paper affirms or confirms their perspective, while the others think the paper is affirming or confirming theirs, and it's the same document, right? There's also self-serving bias, which shows the same type of thing, where we see and we pull out that data that affirms what the data, the conclusions that affirm or, support what is best or in our best interests, right? There are a lot of great examples like that related to it. Thank you, James. Somebody else. What are the other dangers? Are there other dangers?
There may be,
yeah, go ahead, Jane.
there may be a danger that, oh, I forgot what I was going to say now. God. Oh, dear Lord. I think that what I was going to say was
Nurse.
that there's a danger that we get too comfortable. We kind of affirm that what we're seeing is what we're seeing, and we look at stuff very quickly. And Russell's point about the upside down eyes was a really good reminder that we shouldn't take at face value what it is that we see.
Yeah.
And I think that that happens a lot, especially if we think we've seen it before. And so it's the same with conversations in a meeting. Oh yeah, I've been down this route before. I know where this is going. I know what kind of decision I'm going to make. Bish bash bosh, let's get it over and move on. And I think that we just need to stop and think and check that actually, but it's safe to recognize something that's just a little bit odd, and that we'll be okay with that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jane. A lot of times we don't take time to peel that onion, right? Or look for disconfirming data because this looks familiar. This looks like something we know. And so we move ahead and not realize that, hold on a second, this is different. And we need to take some time to perhaps look around, right? And learn some more, dig deeper. We also don't meet and learn from others, right? And for some of us, that's enjoyable or fun. So we're actually losing out on those personal relationships. We're not building, when we think about sustained success, we're not building living, growing communities. We end up being less healthy and dying younger. So there's a lot of work at looking at blue zones in the world. And we also, like you're talking about, risk having that bounded awareness. So there's a lot of look at, we have some information or some things that we know in common, and teams tend to speak more about those things that they know in common. We don't talk about those things that only I know, or only Russell knows, or only Lorian knows. We tend to keep that separate, not that we're hoarding that data or consciously keeping it out of our discussions, but the team tends not to be able to bring that forward in the same way it brings together the common data. So in so many ways, right, this collaboration, learning from others, while also sharing our diverse perspectives with them, creates sustained success. So thanks for bringing that forward. Anything else that people would share about why this is important? Why don't we do it more often if it is important?
I guess part of us is we're addicted to familiarity. We like our little model of the world that works for us, and we think it's right. Often we don't realize we live an experience of our thinking, not reality. We think it's right because it makes sense to us, and that feels comfortable. So actually collaborating with others, sometimes we need to get out of our comfort zone and start seeing things from a different perspective. Yeah,
you're so right. The human brain also preferences the familiar, right? We are drawn to people who are more like us than those who are less like us. It's easier to shorthand it, right? It's easier to do things with people who are sharing some similarities with us. So again, it's not like we're creating an echo chamber necessarily, but we're not getting that diversity of perspective that we could. So with those limited viewpoints, we also end up with some decision-making blind spots. So Richard and I have an exercise that we're going to share with you. And Richard's going to walk you through that enables all of us to think about our own networks and how they might be impacting the quality of the information and the perspectives that we all receive. Richard, read it.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that came up for me is one of my biases that I'm attentive to in this conversation is I have a tendency to have a bias towards action. And I often, meaning that sort of where I can go first is make a decision, move on, and be quick. And I also often find myself in contexts that reward that, so that when I see Adele's face and it looks familiar, I'm happy to move on and move forward. And so having folks like James, who quickly saw something's not quite right here, pause, let's discuss this, in my network, in who I can pay attention to, who's comfortable enough to say, hey, a minute, I see something different perhaps, and that we've created an environment where we can slow down and share our perspectives together, enhances what I gain and helps me manage my own blind spot around this bias towards action. So in this activity, this exercise, we're going to invite you, we should have said this. It will be helpful to have a piece of paper. And if you're, this is where I remember I said I'm more high touch than high tech. This is the really high touch version of that. But if you don't have access to a piece of paper and you prefer an Excel spreadsheet, you're going to make a table. So however you want to make a table, this will be helpful, or on your phone somehow. Let me share my screen here. Here we go. We call this activity My Trusted 10. So I'm going to ask you to make a table that has 10 rows and like 13 or so columns, plus or minus. what I'm going to ask you to do in just a minute is to populate that first column on the left with the names or the initials of people you would say are in your sort of trusted circle of advisors, your go-to people, folks you can count on and utilize for support, for guidance, for counsel. These are people who sort of like your board of directors who have your best interest at heart, but also have some governance responsibility. They hold you to account. These would be people who might say to me, Richard, I know you could do better, or I know you wanted to work on X, but all your attention seems to be on Y. What's going on? So I'm going to ask you to populate that that column with the names or initials, and this is a sample one of various names. Not your family. Let's operate out of an assumption right now that they're a given potentially, but folks either at work or outside of work who you would draw on. So take a couple minutes just to come up with the 10 or so. I did this recently, and one of the things that I noticed over the years, for example, I did this same exercise that we're going to go through now on my own, and I actually did it sort of who are my trusted advisors today versus earlier in my career. And one of the things I noticed is my trusted advisors circle today is a little smaller. And I can talk later about why that may be. So I only had 7. So if you have 7, great. If you have 12, great. But who would be those people who are your confidants, who you are more likely to have what I would call transformational connection with rather than transactional? People who you have a human, deeper connection that you talk with beyond just things like planning for your workday or your budget or this or that, which is important. And when you've got your trusted 10 listed in the reaction, using the reactions down below, just give me we'll do a heart, a red heart. That way I can know who when we're done. All right, Russell, thank you.
And that's from the reactions at the bottom of your screen if you're not a frequent.
On the toolbar, or if you're on a handheld device of some sort, just tap your screen and the reactions should pop up.
Thanks, Gula. Thank you, Brady. Thanks, James.
All right, I think we're pretty close. So if you're still coming up with your 10 or so, just keep your ears open. I'm going to move us into the next phase. So in the columns, we've populated this with a number of dimensions of who people can be or are in the world. And what I'm going to ask you to do is code using these various dimensions of diversity of the ways in which people may show up, using whatever naming convention you might want associated with each of the various people. So location might be where they currently live or where they're from. Thinking style, you might think extrovert or introvert, people-oriented, task-oriented, whatever sort of style of thinking or approach you might consider useful for you to have a framework around. Languages spoken, it could be first languages, many languages. Gender expression, do they identify as male, female, non-binary, non-conforming, sexual orientation, lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, whatever makes sense to you if you know it. Gender identity, cisgender, transgender, ethnicity or race, role, position, and industry, age, generation. It could be an age, it could be 45 years old in this example, it could be millennial, Gen X, some category that makes sense to you, faith, religion, social class, could be background or current, other, it could be whether they have an ability, disability status that you're aware of, it could be sort of educational background, or any other category. So take a couple minutes to fill this out and notice what you notice as you fill this out. What comes up for you, your thoughts, feelings, observations, patterns, what's hard, what's surprising.
Hey, Janet, welcome to you. We're doing an exercise that we just are starting, and it's, oh, she just popped, hello there. And it's an opportunity you need a piece of paper for, or something that you can do on an Excel spreadsheet as well. But what you do is you draw a chart that looks like the one on the screen, and you think about who would be your trusted 10. And you may not have 10 people exactly, you may have more or less. Those are kind of, you know, who you think of as people who are in your inner circle, those that you've candid conversations with. The names or initials for those people go down the left-hand side, that first column. And then there's other dimensions that Richard has just introduced to the group, but they're just kind of populating now.
Got it.
Of course.
Thank you.
Once you've had a chance to fill it out, and I assume most of you are still working, which is fine, just turn the sheet over or on a separate sheet of paper. Here's some reflection questions to capture what it is that you did notice as you were filling it out. What was it like to fill it out? What patterns you became aware of? And any implications that your trusted 10 and the nature of who they are have for you when you think personally or organizationally or for your career.
You can also do a screenshot of these questions if it's easier for you.
I've successfully lost lost
You the grid. Let me put it back.
Thank you.
Yep.
No, it's something to do with the view. Sorry. There it is. Got it.
Give you a couple more minutes. When you've gotten to a place where you feel like the trusted 10 table and some of your thoughts are have come forward, just again give me a heart on the reaction bar so I can just gauge where people's readiness are. We're going to move into some breakout rooms in just a second to give you a chance to talk about it. All right.
Thank you, Naomi and Maria. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Jane. James, Russell, Gerardo, Lauren, thank you. All right, so if you're still working, let me just sort of tell you what the next step is. We're going to do some breakout rooms. And in your breakout rooms, we'll just ask you to talk about what you noticed as you filled this out with each other, sort of the patterns, what it was like to fill it out and any implications. And then as a group, identify 2 actions that you can think of that you could take. These may be actions you already engage in or ones that you could engage in to build authentic relationships with the diversity of others and or to maintain the relationship network that you have that has a diversity of perspectives available within it among the people who you go to for counsel and advice. And we're going to take about 15 minutes plus or minus in the breakout rooms, and we'll send you a timed reminder. We probably won't have each of the breakout rooms have a report in with a spokesperson or any of that, so no need to assign a spokesperson. We'll just sort of open it up afterwards for whoever wants to to share. You should get a pop-up that says join this breakout room, and we just ask you to click on that. And
See you in a few minutes.
so Susan, you assigned me to one. I guess it was random, but I didn't join.
Right. No, it's, yeah,
You did it random.
there's, yeah,
Great. So how many breakout rooms? 3?
3. And so room 1 has 4 people, room 2 and 3 have 3.
Perfect. We're on time.
Yeah, it's because Katie is the host and you and I are co-hosts.
Mhm.
And so as I signed the breakout rooms, that's why hello, Katie. That's why it's assigning you to one, you just don't join. Okay. Okay, so 127.
So Katie, do you happen to know, since you're doing a live recording, is this space that we're in now being recorded? So when people watch this back, they're going to hear us chattering?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer, but I can find out immediately for you.
Actually, it is recording it, but we should probably pause this so that people don't have to sit here through the breakout, because not all groups have breakouts.
So,
And
but
they can't, no.
yeah, so there's a recording and then there's the live. So,
Oh,
So
yeah.
the live streaming on Swapcard will be showing this, and then the recording will obviously be this as well.
I see. So there's people maybe watching this on Swapcard now in real time.
Absolutely.
Who
And I
can't be in the
mean,
breakout room.
completely.
Oh,
But they're
so
very
folks-
welcome to join us on Zoom. They
So
can
here's,
jump on.
Susan, here's what I might propose, since we hadn't anticipated this, but why make it, you want to have the conversation about what I noticed when I did this twice?
Yeah, so we've got people who may be watching
Yeah.
stream, which we didn't realize. So yeah,
Yeah.
Richard, go for it.
Yeah. So if anybody's listening to this, this feels like my life. I'm talking, wondering if people are
Anyone's out there.
anyone out there. So as I mentioned, I had did my trusted 10, and I decided to do it in 2 different ways. Sort of my current trusted 10 for the last sort of 20 plus years of my career versus the first 20 plus. No, well, it wasn't exactly 2020, but you know what I mean. So the earlier on in my career, and I started out in diversity, equity, inclusion. Several things that I noticed, in addition to what I mentioned, Susan, that my circle of trusted connections has gotten a little bit smaller. And I think that's driven by a couple things. Oh, here comes Rebecca in the waiting room. Not only, hello, Rebecca. This is the organic nature of working in virtually. Oh, bye, Rebecca. So what I was saying is, I began my career doing mostly diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and leadership as an element of that. And then I would say in the last 10 years, a majority of my work shifted more specifically into the leadership development domain, with a little less focus on DEI, though I always bring that because I don't think you can do leadership development without DEI. But it has meant my circle has not only gotten smaller, it's gotten less diverse in some ways, partly because sort of the nature of my contacts, of not just the nature of people who do DEI work versus leadership work, but the context in which we do that work. I'm also an introvert, believe it or not. And so I'm not a natural networker. So it takes effort for me to get out there and do some networking. And so it's a reminder for me to about the importance of being intentional in doing that, sort of building my connections and sustaining those relationships. And also as I'm older.
Hey, Richard, can I interrupt you for a second?
Please.
And I want to welcome Rebecca. Hey, Rebecca, welcome to you. Rebecca, can you hear me?
Sorry, I was just turning my camera on and unmuting myself. Hello. I don't know why it hasn't come up with my camera yet. There we go. Hi.
Hi
There
there.
you are.
Good to see you. So we have the folks in breakouts right now doing an exercise. And what I'd love to do is put you in the breakout with them so you can spend about 10 minutes and then come on back. How does that sound?
Excellent. Was I late?
We started out on the hour.
At
Oh,
the top of the hour.
So no
I'm
worries.
so sorry.
No worries, because there's somebody else joining right now as well. And
Oh,
so we
okay.
have to do the same thing. No worries. Glad to have you. And so you can just join in and kind of learn from their discussion. How does that sound?
Lovely. Thank you.
Of course.
Karen as well.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and assign you, Rebecca, to group 2. So just introduce yourself and kind of join right in. Karen, welcome to you. We're Susan and Richard.
Hello, hello.
Hello. So welcome from the jungle. I love that backdrop. So we started at the top of the hour, and we've got the folks in a breakout right now, working on something for about 10 more minutes. And what I'd love to do is have you join in with them so you can get the gist of the conversation. How does that sound?
Thank
Perfect.
you.
Let me go ahead and assign you to group 3. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
Uh-huh.
See you shortly.
Susan, do we need to send a time cue to the breakout rooms?
I will right now. So we've
It
got
should be
10 more
about
minutes.
5.
Yeah.
Well,
No, because
5.
we started at 1:27. It's 1:32.
Okay, perfect. So anyways, as I was saying, Susan, the nature of my work and the nature of who I am have changed, obviously, over the years. So I'm no longer the sort of younger person in the group of my trusted 10. I'm more the sort of the older person, which, but it also has meant there's been a bit less age diversity in my group of trusted colleagues. And that's interesting because I always valued having a lot of age diversity in my circle and I've been painfully aware of what feels like a set of resources that I'm missing. So I have been intentional about trying to broaden that aspect of my connection. The other thing I'm more aware of is more people who are open about their disabilities in my network and my capacity to utilize that. And I think that's about our understanding around the nature of disability and particularly emotional disabilities, et cetera. So Susan, what do you notice when you think about your circle?
I think this was an interesting exercise to do again for me because I haven't done it for a few years, probably 3 years now. And so for me, I think that some relationships have deepened during COVID, because for me, I noticed the most significant change in the last 2 years, actually. And others actually have changed where they've gotten less close, right? Less, I think more superficial, maybe is the right word. So not that they've changed, not that they've become artificial, but there's less depth to them. We're not talking about and engaging in discussions about the types of things we used to, the breadth and the depth of things we used to. And I think that's what changes the frequency with which I've been in touch with some people and the amount of face-to-face time.
What
So,
impact, if any, do you think that's had when you think about blind spots and decision-making and your career, your work?
So it's interesting for me. I actually think I'm spending more time with people who help me think more broadly, because I think the place where I've deepened my connections are with people like you and other people that do this type of work. So people that I think are really great at presencing, are really great at being reflective, are great role models for me. And I also think that kind of on a diversity scale, I don't know that I've maybe increased the diversity as much as I would have wanted to, in terms of perhaps, and part of it too is not traveling as much, right? Part of it is being stuck because of their inability to travel, being stuck at home more or stuck closer to home more. So that would be my.
It's interesting because for me, I think the global nature of my network has gotten less. And I don't know that I would say it's just travel, because virtual connection has actually expanded the possibility of that. But I do think it's the nature of the sort of work that I'm doing and with whom I'm doing it. So for me, it's a good reminder of my network needs to be nurtured and attended to, and not only organically relied on, because then I do have the potential to either be drawn into connection with people who are more like me, or be in connection with people more like me because of the systems in which I find myself working. So when it's only organic and not intentional as well, then I probably have at greater risk. I know I'm at greater risk for that echo chamber that you referred to earlier.
I think also some of these topics have become divisive to people. And so I think it's been challenging to have conversations where sometimes the perspectives are so far apart. I think with some people, it's more comfortable to have those conversations. And with some people, it's not, because it becomes actually, it becomes more challenging to hold the relationship.
Well, especially when you use an organic vehicle as your primary vehicle for building connection. I was like, Adele is sort of a neutral. The blind spot example is sort of neutral. But if it's something that's potentially more loaded, that I see something you don't see, then I have to sit in that space of, well, how do I feel about what you see? And what does it mean for me to make myself vulnerable to say, I didn't see that, and to have the courage that it requires to step into that space, to say, we might see these things differently. And if they're polarized in a polarizing environment, and we haven't attended to the sufficient psychological safety that makes those conversations easier to have, then my decision making is obviously impacted in a negative sort of way. So while I pride myself in sort of feeling like most of my relationships that I've invested in, there's a foundation of psychological safety, I know in the organic space that's not necessarily always the case.
Yeah. Well, I think that psychological safety bit is so important. And when I say bit, I don't mean it casually. What I mean is that element is so critical, right? To
Fiona.
Hey, Fiona, how are you?
Oh yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I came out of the room because I've got to make a phone call. So,
okay.
I'm going to sort of mute myself and go back. But it's wonderful, and there's some great we're having a great conversation in the room. So
Perfect.
I'm here and I'm not here, if that makes sense. So
perfect.
Yeah, it's a lovely session though. Really enjoying it. Well done. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
good to see you as always. Good to see you this morning too.
Thank you, and you. Bye.
Thanks.
Oh, Susan, by the way, I saw you put the tips and resources handout. It
Yeah,
went just to me.
I know. I was just testing. I could have said it
okay.
because nobody was here, but thanks. Yeah, I just my chat to everyone.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got
how much more time on the timer?
I sent them a 5-minute, I sent them a 10-minute, and so now it's 39. They've got 3 more minutes.
Great.
I'll send them a bringing you back message in 2 minutes. Like a.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear what not just their experience, but any tips that they have for making a difference here.
Yeah.
And for those who are out in the live stream atmosphere, I'm hoping as you reflected on your trusted 10, that there were some observations that you made, hopefully surprises. I find sometimes the surprises for me is where the greatest aha is, and I get to then spend some more time reflecting on that and take it to my trusted 10. Here's my surprise. What do you see in this? Because this is what I'm surprised by. What else might I be missing?
Yeah, it's fun to share those ahas. And I always, enjoy sharing them with you and and having a good discussion about that, or sending you a text and having a fun little exchange if it's not something that requires a deep conversation. So,
Yeah, I was fascinated by the fact, for example, another thing that's changed is I have fewer trans folks, people who identify as transgender in my circle than I did in the past. And I think probably for more people, it's just the opposite. And again, it's just sort of the context in which I find myself. And yet I also know with greater intention, for me, having authentic relationships with people who are trans is not something that would be hard for me. It's more people I've lost some touch with for various reasons. And I can't reiterate enough, we'll talk about it, around not seeking out relationships just because of someone's diversity.
So I just have them bringing it back and I close the room.
Great.
So it'll be another like 40 seconds or something. 20 more seconds.
It's a good sign that they're all not rushing back.
It is, I know. I know when Fiona came back, I thought, oh, they're coming back so early.
Here we are.
Welcome back. Hey everyone, welcome back. Love seeing the smiles. And we'd love to hear a little bit of the discussions that happened in your breakout. So what was it like to fill that out? What was it like to reflect on the top 10, and how did that process go for you?
I found it really interesting, really helpful. I mean, I've done a similar exercise in the past, creating that list. And at first time I did it, I found it quite hard to create the list, but now the names come much more easily. But it was really life affirming to have the list and to think that at list is there. These people are there. If I ring them up, they'll answer the phone. And initially I was doing the list today and I thought, well, there's a lot of copy and pasting here. There's a lot of similarity. I mean, in two men's groups, there's a lot of men. There are women on the list as well. But in our group, we're talking about that actually the thinking style is really key. If they've got different thinking style, they may be the same gender, but it's the thinking style that I think makes a big difference. But it's helpful to be mindful of the fact there's a lot of similarities, but I don't think it's a problem as long as I'm consciously aware of it. We had a great conversation about groups as well, without having individuals, about having groups and being witnessed by a group and supported by a group, because then you get the diversity within a group rather than just a one-to-one. So we had a great, I love that conversation.
That's great. Thanks for that, Russell. So that clarity that you talked about, was it because you had done the exercise before that you could come up with the names so quickly? Or do you think that you've gotten greater clarity on who your trusted 10 is that gives you that specificity?
I think I've greater clarity because I've done it in the past, being more mindful, who is my kind of board of advisors and how can I expand that as well? And maintain, it's been more mindful about maintaining relationships as well. So some people I might not speak to very frequently, but we do check in. I'm more mindful about keeping that network wider and open.
Yeah, thanks for that. There is definitely kind of the feeding and care of these people in that network, right? How much do we attend to them? How much are we checking in with them, not just when people are needed, right? But how much are we building that relationship and maintaining it? Thanks for that. And I'm glad to hear you had a good conversation as well. So it's, people's thinking style, but also sometimes we go to different people for different things. This person because they will tell me what I need to hear, right? Or this person because I can sit back and perhaps learn some things that I know that no one else will give me, right? And so it's maybe even sometimes hard to get those nuances of what it is, what's the differentiator, right? Thank you. Somebody else.
It's a tough question. What did it feel like to do it? It just generated lots and lots and lots and lots of questions in my head, actually. Lots of questions. how do I do that, and how much of a difference does this make, and just a lot of questions that we found ourselves discussing in our little group.
Thanks for saying that, Janet. Any other questions that you'd share with the big group?
Well, one of the ones we were talking about is that how do you, without being patronizing or tokenism, how do you expand those areas that you want to expand? How do you include people that are the people that you wouldn't naturally or normally connect with because you're like-minded or because you have some things in common? You're actually, so you meet all these people at a conference, and there are certain ones that you want to stay connected with and certain ones that kind of you blow off. And if you deliberately want to say, I actually want to connect with the ones I want to blow off instead of the ones that I naturally connect with, how do you do that? How do you generate common ground when you might see the world very differently to them?
Yeah, and being conscious about, why did I decide to blow off those people, right?
Yeah.
What is the reason for that? And why is it that I'm drawn to these other folks?
Well, yeah. And so, I mean, I even said in the introduction, it was sort of love at first sight when I saw Susan, right? Why am I drawn? Is there, oh, I see Adele, versus why am I not so drawn? Those are really important questions. And we'll share some tips that we came up with, but I'm curious what you guys came up with to that question, because to be drawn to someone or to draw yourself to someone just because they're not represented in your trusted 10 category is problematic. So potentially.
But I want to know what the world looks like to them. I mean, I've just completed this amazing program, or just before the pandemic, working with women leaders in Dubai, and they're all Emirati women, and working, they'd have one-on-one coaching throughout the program, working so closely and learning about the lives of women and being a trusted confidant has opened my mind enormously. And it's not that I would have blown them off, as we said. And had I met one of them at a conference, I might not have imagined we had common ground, or it's an absence of attraction rather than anything deliberate in them not appealing to me.
And yet what was deliberate, I'm assuming, was your choice to participate in that program.
Absolutely, yes.
And so those become other choice points that we have around, do I say yes to this opportunity? Do I seek out an opportunity that increases the probability that I'll have relationships with people who I don't yet know, or not necessarily like me? And maybe it's seeking out the opportunity rather than the individual. Yeah,
that's a good thought. Yeah. And I think I've always done that. And it's one of the things I've loved about my work.
Brilliant.
You know,
What are some other ways, folks, that you've reached out to different others that hasn't been about tokenism? It's been about building true, authentic relationships.
Well, there is that element of, there's no logic or common sense or rationale behind why, when you meet somebody, you just have a depth of connection, familiarity, trust, and there's no logical explanation for it whatsoever, because you've just met 20 people that day, but this one person has touched you in a way that defies general logic and normal common sense. And that can happen anywhere, obviously, by definition. But it's a really interesting question, actually, that Janet raised, because how, one of the things that got me thinking in this exercise was, where do you go, especially in the world of lockdown? Where do you go to expand and meet different people? Now, if you live in a city, it's relatively straightforward because you are inherently surrounded by great diversity. Not that it necessarily makes it easier. If you live very rurally, then you're not surrounded by great diversity other than the type of farming people do, which doesn't, and as Jeremy Clarkson once famously said in his program, I have a great diversity of every single type of 55-year-old white male farmer available to me. And that's just very limiting. So for me, it's the opportunity to go to conferences like this where you haven't been able to go for the last couple of years. But when you go to a conference such as this, or a Be the Change, or, you know, there are many, you inherently go with people who may think that you have similar views potentially, that I want to go to this type of event, but you naturally have a great diversity inherently around you. And for those who are open to conversation and meeting and chatting, it naturally just gives you the opportunity to do that. But the online world, which we're in currently, although we're potentially coming out of it slightly, is more challenging for those of us that naturally network when we meet people, but aren't necessarily great at going to networking events, because I personally find them horrific. But I'll network brilliantly if I'm not at a networking event. You know, it's a really interesting question and dynamic, which this exercise has thrown up, along with your point, Richard, about the list of people that I have available to me now since children has just collapsed in on itself and is much, much smaller now.
Well, ironically, I think about like social media, which potentially has the capacity for me to reach out to lots of people. And that has expanded greatly, but I don't think of those connections as transformational. I think of them as transactional and superficial. And the really important relationships. I also know I'm not a networker either. I'm an introvert. So going to a conference is painful for me to make some of those connections. But I know my work then is to show up differently. And that's a requirement of my intentionality and it's not about even love at first sight for me and finding an immediate connection. It's about putting in the effort to germinate a relationship over time that may or may not evolve into something, but I have to be open to that. But as I was suggesting to Janet, putting myself into that position, that's my work.
I was going to say, you know, part of the lockdown thing has enabled you to reinvent yourself. So if you say, right, the outcome is I need those relationships, but I now need to sort of sweep away everything I was doing before. I found actually that the fact that you can connect, I'm a linguist and I speak lots of different languages. I wasn't traveling because of lockdown, but actually the virtual platform has enabled that connection. So I've chosen things to participate in. I found people on those platforms that perhaps are different parts of the world, different cultures, origins. I've been doing quite a lot of work over the platform in the Middle East, doing some cultural transformation work completely virtually. Actually, there's just more possibility. So I was an extrovert naturally, but actually I've been quite excited by the possibilities of connecting with people that are different, because I don't have to meet up in a restaurant or for a drink. I can do a half-hour coffee on a Teams and say, look, do you want to think with me today? I've got this question. I'm really interested in your perspective. And I think the key is having something to start the conversation. There's some great questions out there. And if you start a great question with someone that you've met through something in common, however small that something in common is, there's always something, always a nugget comes out of that conversation.
Absolutely. Naomi, thank you for that. Jane.
I think that's a really interesting point, which triggers me to the discussion that we had in our group. the very act of writing down just helped us to think, oh my God. Okay. And one of our group, and obviously they'll speak up if they want to, but one of our group said their group was very homogeneous. And they hadn't realised that until they actually wrote it down. And common to all of it, so that was one thing. And common to all of us in the group was that we all had young people around us that we really valued and that we didn't talk to enough. And so I said, I wonder if it's a matter of semantics and language, which might be going into too much detail, but whether or not the word trusted and advisor automatically took you or took us to a certain group of people. And in my list, 3 of those people are on this Zoom call. And when I started to look at that, there were people within a certain sort of frame of reference. And yet I've got fantastic godchildren and amazing nieces and nephews. I should use them more. They all do really interesting stuff. they all have, and one of our group had a fantastic example, and of how you respond to how a young person challenges you. For instance, when you send an email to a young person in a corporate environment, and they come and you then chase them up and say, why haven't you responded to my email? And they say, we don't use email, I use Slack or something else. And then you say, well, I'm sorry, but email is the way we do it here. But actually it's not going to be the new way of doing things. So it's just kind of listening and opening yourself up to what you learn through this process, but also just understanding that if you have got this kind of homogeneous group, either of age or gender, that you've got lots of opportunities around you to grow that.
Well, I mean, go ahead, James.
Sorry, so I just think, Jen, on that point, I think that one of the things you've said, which really struck a chord with me, was that our association with the linguistics. So when you say someone who's an advisor, somebody we think traditionally, and though, well, I think I'll own this personally with my generation, I think of somebody who's equivalent generation, maybe slightly older. And yet a conversation I had in a previous group today was with a gentleman called Sir Christopher Bull, who is one of the UK's leading academics. And his view is very simple, that you should always be coached by a member of a different generation, preferably 2 or 3 lower than you, because they will ask you things which you wouldn't contemplate as a question. And therefore the quality of question you get isn't better or worse. It's just fundamentally different. And so, Jane, I think your point about not viewing younger generations as a trusted confidant, I think there's a comfort in people of our own generation or older. It's the maternal figure, the paternal figure gives us that comfort, but it's not often child related. And why not?
I'm appreciative of how the term advisor can trigger an association that can be limiting. I'm also aware of the time. We have a number of tips. I'm not going to necessarily walk through them, but we're going to put them in the chat. You can download them. But what it made me think of is there's an HBR article, if you're interested, I'm sure you can Google it and find it, about the importance of having a multi-generational board of directors for just, James, the reasons that you're talking about. And so on our tips that we're going to share, I think Susan just put them into chat, and feel free to download them. We have tips. And let me just share my screen really quick so you see what we're talking about. Where's my share screen? There we go. We have tips in 2 buckets. Tips for expanding your network, such as seeking out situations like Janet talked about that put you in the potential to connect with other folks. Participating in mentoring processes that also sort of dislocate where power is. So this assumption that the advisor has to be older or senior, but that mentoring can happen in many different directions and doesn't necessarily have to be transactional. To look at sort of who are you in regular contact with, not just sort of who's in your trusted 10, but do an audit of your Slack, your Teams, your Outlook connections. And what is that saying about the potential to broaden, or what we call build your ties? But as Janet and others have said, our number 4 is do not seek out people because of their diversity, but seek out people in order to expand your network, get to know them better, and then see if they fit into your sort of trusted circle. Use your dormant ties, people you've had connections but lost some connection with more recently, and begin to rekindle them. So these are tips for expanding your network, and there's a couple other on the handout, and then tips for managing your blind spots. And we will share those for you to pay attention to. We've also got some resources for those of you who like articles and that sort of. These are all hyperlinked. You can get to the article, and Susan's and my contact information is there. Gosh, I wish I was in the breakout rooms with you.
Great discussions, everybody. Anything else that you'd like to share? Put in chat. Any other highlights from your conversations?
So Naomi, I love this rather than advisor, thinking partner. That's really helpful.
framed well by our linguist. Okay, folks, thanks so much for your time. It was such a pleasure being here with you this afternoon for me, evening for some of you, and spending time with Richard as always.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Richard. That was, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you
nice
all
to
very
see
much.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.